Hi folks, today we're going to talk about trolling a Dick Nite spoon. Jim Stahl of Northwest Fishing Guides is with me today, and this trolling technique we're going to talk about, correct me if I'm wrong Jim, it's one of your staples in fishing for salmon in the fall.
It's kind of what I've been known for, especially in the lower Snohomish. I'd much rather be trolling than casting, hanging up, putting up with the rat race up there. But to me, it's just nice to get the lines out, get the rods working, watch that rod roll over and catch those fish.
Now guys, this trolling setup is really limited to people that are in a boat. So if you're on a bank, there are other setups that we're going to talk about in other segments. But this is strictly for those of you that are in a boat and have the ability to move through the river or the water to try and catch your fish. So the setup for the trolling of the Dick Nite spoon is essentially the same as the setup for drift fishing. So if you missed the drift fishing segment, I encourage you to go back and watch it now so that you can see how we put our terminal tackle together. So folks, in the drift fishing segment, you're going to see that we've put a 5mm bead, a snap swivel, a 4mm bead, and then of course our barrel swivel. Now, not everybody uses the snap swivel, but we're going to show the snap swivel today, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment. Trolling the Dick Nite spoon isn't really all that different from drift fishing. It's absolutely essential that you achieve the proper action of the spoon. If you don't have the proper action of the spoon, you're not going to be fishing effectively. That means that boat control and boat speed is going to be important. Jim, I'm sure that you find that when you're on the river, you're really having to manipulate your boat speed.
Yeah, and it depends on if you're going upstream or downstream, but don't be afraid to kick that, kicker motor in and out of gear. I'll usually when I'm trolling, I'll usually have a rod in my hand so I can feel what it's doing, if we're on bottom, if we're not on bottom. But the biggest thing is once you get a speed, constant speed that works, every once in a while kick that kicker motor out of gear and let your stuff fall, find bottom, kick it back in gear. But don't be afraid to go either way. Go upstream, go downstream. The biggest problem, especially with the tides, is if you get a strong tide, sometimes you can't go against it, because if you try to go against it, you get that lure where it's spinning. Then turn around and go downstream. The other nice thing about going downstream with the tide is you cover lots of water.
Yes.
And then other times, if I'm catching a few fish and I've been trolling downstream, but I know there's a ton of fish there, sometimes I'll drop anchor and I'll also go back to drift fishing. But so one nice thing about the trolling, it's not just, that you're catching fish, but you're also looking for hopefully more aggressive fish.
That's right. So folks, water speed is important, so pay attention to water speed. And strong recommendation, when you start your trolling, don't just put your rig way out behind the boat and start trolling. Put it right next to the boat, see what your speed is, and make sure that your lure is actioning properly. That's the great thing about your trolling speed, is you can actually make adjustments to your speed and you can see the lure in the water right there. So let's talk about the setup. We've already shown you what the terminal tackle looks like, and it's not any different than drift fishing, but there is something that we're going to change on this. What do we have here, Jim?
Well, we're adding the dropper. In the first segment, we mainly talked about pencil lead, and then we added the dropper. For the troll fishing, I'm exclusively using the dropper. And what that allows me to do is, here I'm more worried about dropper length. If those fish are hugging the bottom like coho sometimes do, I might only use a 6 or an 8-inch dropper. If they're up off the bottom a little more, or it's a real snaggy situation, I'll use a 12 and even sometimes a 2-foot leader. But to me, leader length in the troll is very, very important. It helps get you off the bottom. You don't want that spoon hanging up constantly. If the lead's hanging up, you're in good situation. If the spoon's hanging up, you're not fishing.
I agree. And folks, just as with drift fishing, the amount of lead that you use while you're trolling is important. If you're using too much lead and you're just dragging across the bottom constantly, you're going to put yourself in a situation where you're going to lose not only lead, but you may lose your other tackle. Because when that system gets hung up and that Dick Nite is no longer working with the hydraulics of the river, it's going to fall to the bottom.
Correct.
So make sure that you're choosing the right amount of lead and that you're just ticking across the bottom as you're trolling. You need a selection of lead, guys. If you don't pour your own, make sure that you buy a good selection. What kind of range of weight do you use for your cannonballs when you're trolling?
I'll use anywhere from ½ ounce, 3/4 ounce, up to an ounce. I don't get much more than an ounce because if you are, then you're dragging bottom. Or if the water is moving that fast, it's really hard to slow the spoon down and effectively. If it's moving that fast, then you should probably go to spinners. But anywhere from ½ to 1 ounce, and you're in good shape.
I agree, folks. So make sure that you have a selection lead, have a selection of colors in the Dick Nite spoons, and get out there and start trolling. Again, the setup is very easy. The terminal tackle is the same. All we're doing here is we're going to take our dropper and we're going to put it on our snap swivel here, and you're fishing. You're still going to be fishing those 6-foot leaders. You want those leaders away from your terminal tackle so it doesn't spook the fish. To learn more about fishing with Jim or myself, visit northwestfishingguides.net, ridge2riveroutdoors.com, or visit dicknite.com. Thanks for watching.